Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my full review of the Spirit Torino Radiante 1706 Special Edition. And gotta be honest with you, I've struggled a little bit with this video, and I think the reason why is I have a little bit of mixed feelings about this headphone. And if you watched my first impressions a couple weeks ago, I got into that a little bit, and basically when I do my first impressions, I just listen to a headphone or an amp or whatever and don't listen to anything else. You know, I'll spend maybe 2, 3, 4 hours with it and then, you know, do a video about my first impressions, but I usually don't compare it to other headphones. And like a lot of people, I think, you know, my brain quickly adjusts to the sound and, you know, basically makes it sound right, even if it's not completely right, or maybe it is right, but it's not exactly what I'm used to or what I like. But then when I do my full review, I spend a lot of time comparing a headphone to other headphones, and that's when I realize, you know, you know, what's going on with that headphone as far as tone balance, as far as, you know, just about everything. I really have to make a comparison directly, you know, just jump back and forth between two headphones before I can really, you know, give a solid review about it, you know, because like I said, you know, if I just listen to one headphone, within minutes my brain adjusts to that headphone and, you know, it can sound pretty much perfect. But then when I go and compare it to something that I've been listening to for a long time and use as a reference, you know, my opinion can change. And that's why sometimes, you know, my opinion does change a little bit between my first impressions and my full review. So anyway, I'm going to get into this a little bit, and I already, in my first impressions, I covered the statistics of this, but I'll go over them quickly and then jump into the sound of this headphone a little bit. This headphone is made in Italy. It currently sells for $2,450 and is available in the U.S. through Headamp. I believe they're the only authorized dealer in the United States right now of Spirit Torino headphones. This is a wired, full-size, over-the-ear, closed-back design. It uses a dynamic driver in what Spirit Torino calls a passive radiator design. It has an impedance of 32 ohms. It has a sensitivity of, we don't know. I guess Spirit Torino didn't state that in their website. So anyway, as far as sensitivity, I would say it's pretty much about average for a 32 ohm dynamic driver headphone. It's fairly easy to drive and doesn't require anything special as far as an amp. The weight is claimed to be 370 grams, but my kitchen scale is coming in quite a bit heavier at 466, which doesn't make this a really heavy headphone, but it is, you know, it's fairly heavy and it is a solid feeling headphone, you know. I mean, it's got some weight to it, but not excessively heavy. It comes with a detachable cable, and as you can see here, it has what's pretty much standard now, 3.5 millimeter connectors in the cable. It's a nice quality cable, and it is, I think you can order this with either the standard 6.3 millimeter single-ended connector at the amp end, or this one came with a 4-pin XLR. And then, like I said, it's got your 3.5 millimeter connections at the headphone end, and I don't know what this is, probably about, I'd say about 7 or 8 feet long, and nice material and nice and flexible and doesn't make any noise rubbing on itself. Anyway, before this video started, I gave you a look at the very nice wooden box it came in with substantial foam padding. It's well protected, and the box is nice enough to use for a display case. I want to give you a closer look at the headphone itself. I know it A lot of people make comments about these that they look a lot like Grottos, and they do have a similar design and sort of the same swiveling post adjustment and all that, but the ear cups are made entirely of aluminum. The yokes are made of aluminum. The shaft, I believe, is steel. Then you've got an aluminum block on your head strap, and then the head strap itself is leather on the inside, and I do believe that's real leather, and what looks and feels like a suede on the outside. And the ear pads are leather around the outside, and then the inside is, I believe it's called Alcantara, which is sort of a felt material, but it's very soft and very comfortable. Anyway, and the ear pads are tapered. They're thicker in the back than they are in the front, which angles the drivers a little bit. And they adjust up and down pretty much the same as like a Grotto would. And then as far as fit and comfort, the weight doesn't bother me at all. They don't feel heavy to me, but if you watch my videos, you know the heavy headphones really don't bother me. They're pretty comfortable. The pads are real soft and real comfortable. My only complaint would be that the ear pads are just a little bit small in size, and my ears do feel slightly cramped inside of these. So other than that though, very comfortable. The clamping pressure is about right. They don't squeeze on my head, but yet they don't feel like they're going to fall off. I can move around and not feel like, you know, I'm going to lose them and drop them on the floor or anything like that. The build quality seems to be outstanding. I mean, just it's a beautiful headphone in my opinion, and like I said, just the craftsmanship, all the aluminum parts, the stitching on the headband, everything, just outstanding. So build quality, definitely, you know, about as good as it gets. I want to get into the sound of these, and like I said in the beginning of this video, I have a little bit of mixed feelings about this headphone, and I would say the reason why is because I feel like I'm reviewing two different headphones here. This headphone can be two completely different headphones depending on whether you listen to it with or without an EQ. If you EQ this headphone, and it does respond exceptionally well. This headphone probably responds to EQing better than any other headphone I've heard. It has been, I've noticed that it seems like dynamic driver headphones do respond better to EQing than the planar magnetics do. And this one just seems to respond really well. So, you know, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about EQing. Some people, you know, have no problem with it, and other people just are totally against it. So I'm going to describe this headphone in two different ways. I'm going to tell you how it sounds to me right out of the box without any EQ, and then I'm going to describe how it sounds to me when I do EQ it, because like I said, you can transform this into a completely different headphone with a little bit of moderate EQing. And to be honest, right out of the box, this headphone really, I'm not saying it's a bad headphone at all, because this headphone is probably exactly what a lot of people want. But for my personal taste, it's not exactly my cup of tea right out of the box. I prefer headphones that are pretty close to neutral, maybe a slight emphasis on the bass. Excuse me a second. Maybe a slight emphasis on the bass, maybe the treble. It depends on the headphone. Some headphones, if they're a little on the dark side, I like a little bit of emphasis. But anyway, I basically like a pretty neutral headphone. And to be honest, this headphone is very bass heavy. It's all three of the Spirit Torino headphones I've reviewed are all on the you know, bass heavy side. They all have a pretty good emphasis on the bass. And of the three, this would be the bassiest of the three. So like I said, it's just not exactly what I would be my first choice, but I've done some EQing on this headphone, and I can make this headphone sound pretty much any way I want it to, and I can make it a very enjoyable headphone that I really like. So that's what I'm going to talk about, what how this headphone sounds either of the way, because like I said, I can make this headphone sound like almost anything I want, and it seems like it's more so than any other headphone I've reviewed. I mean, some headphones that I've tried to, that I thought maybe sound a little thin, tried to give them some bass boost, it just didn't respond well. I mean, the bass would pick up a little bit, but it got a little muddy or whatever, and some headphones just don't want to be changed. Apparently they want to stay the way they are, and this one will become pretty much anything you want it to be. So anyway, I get into it, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the equipment I used. I run CDs, and I use a Cambridge Audio 540C CD player as a transport only, and I run that into a Benchmark Media DAC1. And then in this case, I'm running the single-ended outputs from the Benchmark into a Shit Loki 4-band equalizer, and then from there into a Head Amp GSX Mini, which was my primary amp reviewing this headphone. As far as comparing it to other headphones, I used the primary comparison I used was the Kennerton Odin, the 2019 version of that, and the reason why is because of the similar price. I believe the Odin goes for about $21.70 now, which is a couple $100 less than this headphone. It is an open back, but it's the only thing I had in a similar price range. I did compare this a little bit to the Kennerton Magni, which is a closed back, but that sells for I think $7 something, and I compared it a little bit to the Bear Dynamics T1 second generation, which is a semi-open back, and I think that headphone goes for about $7.99 now, so quite a bit cheaper. But anyway, I used what I had that I thought would be a good comparison. So anyway, as far as music, I use a variety. A lot of classic rock, some pop, some electronic, some acoustical music, a little bit of orchestral music, that sort of thing. Some jazz, different types of rock, even into a little bit of industrial things like that. So anyway, pretty good variety. And basically, out of the box, I would describe the tone balance of this headphone as very bass heavy and moderately dark. My first impressions video on this, I said it was slightly dark, I think was the word I used, and but after listening to it more, putting more time in, and comparing it to some other headphones, I would say it's it's moderately dark. It's sort of a dark sounding headphone. It's very heavy on the bass, and the mid-range is it definitely set back from the bass and sounds a little distant, and the treble might bump up just a little bit. There is some treble there, and there is a little bit of sparkle to it, but both the mid-range and the treble sound sort of distant, and the primary characteristic of this headphone is bass. That's what you're getting, and the thing is, though, the bass is very solid, very tight, and well controlled. I mean, I've listened to some headphones that the bass was bumped up a little bit that just didn't keep it under control, and some expensive headphones that just didn't do as well a job as this headphone does at controlling the bass. The bass, I would estimate from neutral, there's probably about a 12 decibel boost in the bass on this, and yet it's still, it doesn't sound muddy, it doesn't sound distorted, it's pretty well controlled. In my opinion, out of the box, it can be a little overwhelming at times. And that's why I did, do some experimenting with EQing and came up with some pretty good results. When I EQ'd it, I could get the tone balance, just almost neutral, probably a little bit V-shaped is what I ended up with, a slight V-shape with a little bit of emphasis in the bass, and the bass became very tight and very well controlled. When I EQ'd this, what I finally came up with where I liked it the best, with the shit low key, you have your 4 controls, and the first one is at 20 hertz. And I was actually at about 8 o'clock on it, which is about a 8 decibel cut in the bass. And it still, at that point, was bassier than a lot of other headphones. So that gives you an idea how much bass this headphone has. Getting into the second knob, which is at 400 hertz, I believe. That would be your lower mid-range. I ran it at about 1 o'clock, which would be maybe about 2 decibels of boost. And then the third knob, which would be your higher mid-range, and I think that one's at 2000 hertz. And that knob, I was at about 2 o'clock, which would be probably about 3 decibels of boost. And then the treble, which is at 8000 hertz, I was at 3 o'clock on that, which would be about a 5 decibel boost in the treble. And at that point, I really, really liked the way this headphone sounded. I mean, I was jumping back and forth comparing it to the Odin and to the Bear T1, and it had a similar tone balance to the Bear at that point, which has a slight V shape to the tone balance, and it was still slightly more bassy than the Odin even at that point. But anyway, the frequency extension, without equalizing it, it's very heavy in the bass and goes very low. So I mean, no issues with the frequency extension on the bottom at all. On the top end, without EQ, the treble rolls off pretty sharply, and there's a little bit of treble there, a little bit of sparkle, but it doesn't go real high and it sounds kind of distant. The mids, before I EQ'd it, the mids sounded distant and just kind of almost muffled or veiled. I think it was just that the bass kind of overwhelmed the mids. And the treble, like I said, it was there, but also kind of distant sounding, and, just didn't stand out much at all, I mean, in my opinion, the way this comes, the bass just pretty much dominates the sound. Detail and resolution. When I listened to this without any EQ, there was detail and pretty good texture in the bass, but as far as the mid-range and treble, I wasn't hearing a lot of detail. It just sounded like it was lacking in detail, and it just, had a veiled sound, very distant. And that's the thing that's where I ended up with a huge difference when I EQ'd it. That's when this headphone really came alive to me, because using the EQ, how I described it, this became a completely different headphone. With a little bit of boost in the mid-range and cutting the bass about 8 decibels, it gave the mid-range a chance to come out, and I was really surprised by how detailed this headphone became. I mean, not the absolute most detailed I've ever heard. The Kennerton Thrower was still slightly more detailed, but not the Thrower, the Odin. But the Odin and the Thrower both are kind of on the verge of being almost analytical. They're both very detailed headphones. And this was very close. I mean, the detail was very, very good on this once I bumped the mid-range up. So the detail's there. It's just hiding behind all that bass until you cut the bass back a little bit and boost the mid-range. So I mean, the detail in both, all the way through the frequency, all the way from the bass all the way to the treble, became excellent in my opinion with a little EQing on this headphone. The imaging, before I EQ'd it, basically, and everyone knows this, bass you can't really determine a direction. It just sounds like it's coming from everywhere. That's why you can put a subwoofer pretty much anywhere in the room. Doesn't matter, because your ears don't really detect what direction it's coming from. So without EQ, the headphone was predominantly bass, and the imaging wasn't really jumping out at me as being that precise. But once I EQ'd this, boosted up the mid-range and the treble, cut back the bass a little bit, all of a sudden the imaging became really good on this, really precise and really good separation between the instruments where, I could just pick out one instrument at a time and listen to it without any overlap from other instruments, just, really, really good separation. The soundstage is another thing that drastically improved when I EQ'd it. Before I EQ'd it, the soundstage sounded on the small side. And this is a closed back headphone, and everyone knows closed back headphones tend to have less width to the soundstage, but to be honest, it sounded kind of claustrophobic to me. Just bass heavy, and without the treble and the mids, being where I thought they should be, it just sounded closed in on me. Okay, when I EQ'd this, bumped up the mids and the treble, all of a sudden the soundstage got a lot more width to it. I'm not saying it became huge or anything like that, because once again, this is a closed back headphone. But the soundstage did gain a lot of width, and it gained more depth, and because it's basically the mid-range and treble, which is giving you the clues of, you can locate those a lot better and pick up the direction on them. So soundstage became still a little on the small side, but decent, good for a closed back headphone, and so no complaints about that. The dynamics of this headphone, before I EQ'd it, the bass was very, very dynamic, very hard hitting, very punchy, very solid, but the mids and trebles sounded distant and kind of weak and did not sound dynamic to me. So once I boosted up the mids and the treble, it was dynamic all the way through the frequency range. Even with an 8 decibel cut to the bass was still dynamic and punchy, but the mid-range and treble also became dynamic, and this is actually one of the more dynamic headphones that I've had the chance to listen to. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was the isolation, because that's the reason most people buy a closed back headphone, is for the passive isolation, where it keeps the outside sounds out and it keeps the inside sounds in. And I would say this headphone is actually excellent at both of those. The aluminum enclosure and the thick pads on it and it seals up good around my ears. Does a very good job of keeping outside sounds out, and it also does a very good job of keeping the music in the headphone. I mean, I can listen to these at night when someone's sleeping 5 feet away from me, and not bother them at all. I mean, these do a really good job of keeping the sound in. So what it comes down to, and kind of my final opinion on these headphones, is my question is this headphone right for you? And I guess that depends on a couple of things. The first would be, how do you feel about EQing headphones? If your answer is no, and you say, no, I do not EQ my headphones, I'm going to listen to them right out of the box, I don't believe in EQ, or I don't think it's right, or whatever, and that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, if you don't want an EQ a headphone, then you have to ask yourself, do I want a very bass heavy, little on the dark side headphone? If you do, this may be the perfect headphone for you, and there's a lot of people that like that type of headphone. I know that. I mean, I run the Headphone Experience on Facebook, and I listen to conversations every day. And, you know, there's a lot of people that like bass heavy headphones, and a lot of people that do not like bright headphones. I personally like the Hi-Fi Man Sundara. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that think it's very thin, it has no bass. I've heard people say it has no bass at all. And a lot of people just think it's too bright. And if you're one of those people, then you may love this headphone right out of the box. This may be ideal for you. Okay? If you do like the sound of, say, the Hi-Fi Man Sundara, and you think they have enough bass, and you think the treble's not too bright, or the Hi-Fi Man Aria, which I reviewed a while back, if you like the sound of either of those, then you probably will not like the sound of this headphone without EQ. It's just going to be too bass heavy and too dark for you. Okay, so on the other hand, if you have an EQ and you have no problem, excuse me, and you have no problem with using EQ on a headphone, then you can pretty much make this headphone sound however you want it to. You can make this headphone sound like a Hi-Fi Man headphone. You can boost the treble, you can cut the bass. You can make this headphone sound exactly the way you like it, because like I said, it's extremely responsive to EQ. So if you're going to use an EQ, this, you know, like I said, it really sounded good. The headphone, when I EQ'd it, I got the tone balance exactly how I liked it. It was still punchy, it was still dynamic, it had very good detail, and it was just really enjoyable to listen to. Even with the treble and mid-range boosted, it never sounded harsh, it never sounded sibilant, you know, just very good detail in the treble and the mids and all that, and vocals sounded good. So, it, you know, like I said, with little EQing, you can make this headphone sound exactly how you want it. I was able to do that, and I found it very enjoyable, and it was a very, still slightly on the warm side, not analytical, but very detailed, and just a relaxed, very pleasant sound, and I really liked it. So if you are willing to, you know, experiment a little with an EQ, even if you like a more neutral headphone, this still could work out real well. And like I said, you know, the big benefits being the closed back headphone, where it you know, holds the music in and it keeps the outside sounds out. If you don't want to you know, use an EQ and you don't want a bass heavy headphone, there's probably better choices out there. You know, I mean, if you want a neutral headphone and you know, without the heavy emphasis on the bass in this price range, you know, I might suggest the Kennerton Odin, or for even less money, maybe the Hi-Fi Man Aria. But if you want a, you know, headphone with a whole lot of bass, if you are a bass head, and there's a lot of them out there. I used to be one. You know, 20 years ago, I probably would have loved it just the way it is out of the box. But, you know, my taste has changed over the years, and, you know, I like to hear some detail in the mid-range and treble and all that now. And, you know, that hard thumping bass isn't, you know, that important to me anymore. So, anyway, you know, just ask yourself, do you want to EQ a headphone, and what kind of tone balance you're looking for? This may be ideal for you. There may be better choices. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you are all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. Thank you.